Welcome back, everyone. We are going to continue our study of development by looking at section 4, moral development, and section 5, adolescent development in this particular bit of information. And before we dive into the fun, as always, just want to provide you with a reminder that for this section of information, you're going to want to have open your interactive notebook. As well as for moral development, you're going to want to have open your graphic organizer looking at section 3, where we're going to fill in some information about morality. So once you have those things open and ready to roll, we can dive into the fun together. We're going to start by talking about moral development together in this section. And a key question here is, how do developing humans learn right from wrong? Moral development involves changes in our understanding and interpretation of how the concepts of things like justice, conscience, and ethics apply to our own behavior and the behavior of others. Now, you'll remember that Piaget investigated cognitive reasoning by looking at how children played games and completed tasks. Uh, this person who's famous for moral development, Kohlberg, he looked at how children played with each other and specifically how they answered questions related to moral dilemmas. And he reasoned that moral reasoning progresses as cognitive abilities become more sophisticated and children learn how to understand the point of view of others, which we learned doesn't really happen until that concrete operational stage. So moral reasoning and cognitive reasoning are kind of linked together in the developmental sequence. He also talked about this idea of moral relativity, that rules are formed by mutual agreement among individuals and can be altered under specific circumstances. So there can be cultural differences in morality as well, according to how human beings are reasoning about morality on Earth. Okay, so again, Kohlberg extended Piaget's research by creating a more comprehensive theoretical stage theory. He believed that morality is a decision-making process and not necessarily a fixed set of behavior. So data for his theory was gathered by presenting dilemmas to children, adolescents, and adults, and then asking the individual in the dilemma, what should they do and why? And we're going to talk about a famous example of that called the Heinz dilemma in just a second. As a result of evaluating participant responses, then Kohlberg identified 3 levels of moral reasoning, each of which was divided into 2 stages. But let's take a look at his research methods a little bit more closely, and let's look at his most famous moral dilemma, the Heinz dilemma. So I'm going to give you a moment to read this to yourself, and then we'll continue on together. So you can pause the video and just briefly read through this dilemma. All right, so now that you've read the Heinz dilemma, I'm curious, what would you do? Would you break in and steal the drug to save your dying life partner, or would you obey the law and not do so, even though the chemist is being a little bit greedy? It's a really interesting dilemma. Kohlberg asked this question to 72 boys from Chicago area suburbs, and these boys were 10, 13, and 16 years old. And Kohlberg and his associates asked participants a series of open-ended questions about the dilemmas over the course of a 45-minute period of recorded interviews. And he really focused on the decisions that the participants were making to justify what was right and what was wrong in this particular case. He concluded then that the participants' responses could be categorized into 3 levels of moral development that can be further broken down into 2 stages each. So let's take a look at those. And for life in general, because I think it's interesting, but also for the AP exam itself, they would want you to be able to distinguish between these 3 stages of morality. They'd want you to have a general sense of by what age are people able to reason at these particular stages, and then what does right and wrong look like at each particular stage. So here is when you can shift your attention to your graphic organizer, and for these 3 stages, pre-conventional morality, conventional morality, and post-conventional morality, go ahead and get a description of what this stage looks like. Then you can specifically target in the example areas, what does a right decision look like and a wrong decision look like? Or what do people in these stages say is right or wrong? What do they base that on? And then you can go ahead and look at the explain and apply column as well. So let's start at the very beginning with pre-conventional morality. So Kohlberg said that before age 9, children basically do behaviors to either avoid punishment or gain reward. So it's a really selfish, egocentric moral reasoning that's basically limited to how is this choice going to affect me? Which makes sense because that's really all they can cognitively think about at that particular time. So something at this stage, it's basically right if it gets them a reward or avoids punishment. It's right if it's in their own self-interest. It's wrong if it's not in their self-interest. So very selfish view of moral reasoning at the pre-conventional stage. Children in this particular stage would say that Heinz should not have stolen the medicine because he would get in trouble. Or they might say he should have stolen the medicine because that's in his own self-interest to keep his wife alive. Okay. The conventional level of morality. So by early adolescence, typically moral judgments become to be based on compliance with society's rules and values and things that are learned from parents, teachers, peers, and the media. And so at this particular stage, again, children cognitively can kind of think about the attitudes of other people. They can think about what's right according to law and order in society. And so they tend to expand their view of what's right and wrong to include these things. So something's right if it makes them look good in the eyes of others. And if they're following the law, something's wrong if it makes them look poorly in the light of others or if they're breaking the law. That's what you can put into the example area on your graphic organizer there. And so, for example, these respondents would typically explain that Heinz should not take the medicine because that would mean breaking the established law and order of society, and he would look badly in other people's eyes. Okay. And then the post-conventional level of morality, Holberg said that not every member of society actually even makes it to this level. It takes an incredible amount of self and other awareness in order for you to make it to this level. But he said that adults who develop personal standards of right and wrong, their morality is defined in terms of abstract principles of justice that may or may not be reflected in the law and order of the society that they're living in. So, for instance, I might live with the personal principle that a person's right to life is more important than some law that's established by society. Or I might say that a person's right to social justice, the social contract, is more important than what's articulated in the law if the law is not written to uphold those particular principles. So, for example, something is right in my mind if it upholds my personal moral principles and social contract, even if it's not reflected in the law, and I'm going to act accordingly, which might even mean breaking the law sometimes. And something's wrong then if it goes against my principles or the social contract. In this case, then, at the post-conventional level of morality, these respondents argued that Heinz actually should have stolen the medicine because his wife's right to life supersedes the druggist's right, the chemist's right to private property. Another example might be during the civil rights movement in the 60s, the 50s and 60s. You know, Rosa Parks, she chose to break the law and keep her seat on the bus, not because of pre-conventional reasoning, like I'm tired and I don't want to give up my seat, but because of post-conventional reasoning. She said, I don't think that the law that says I have to give up my seat to a white person is just and fair. And so I'm going to choose not to do that. And I'm going to choose to take the consequences anyway. Jesus, if you look at his actions over the course of his lifetime, operated at that post-conventional level of moral reasoning, saying, I am going by my father's absolute truth. If that's not reflected in your law and order and morality, Pharisees and Sadducees, then I'm not going to do what you're saying, and I'm going to encourage other people not to as well. Okay, some reflections on Kohlberg here. The development of morality is part of the process of socialization. So, human beings learning behavior that's appropriate for a particular culture. A child can't develop a moral system until certain cognitive abilities have developed, like the ability to image the results of their actions and their effects on others. And so, we talked about how moral reasoning is linked to cognitive reasoning. I mentioned that Kohlberg did believe that lots of people never get past those first two stages, and very, very few actually reach that highest stage of moral development. In his studies, in fact, only about 10% of 24-year-olds consistently operated at the post-conventional level. It's easy for us to be selfish and make decisions in that pre-conventional era of self-interest. Kohlberg's research has been supported by subsequent research, and the stages do appear to be universal. However, a criticism of Kohlberg's theory is that the highest stages of reasoning are not as prevalent in the answers of participants from all cultures, suggesting that there could be a cultural bias in the way that he's designed his particular model. Another big criticism of Kohlberg's theory is actually put forth by this woman named Carol Gilligan, who claimed that Kohlberg's research is actually sexist. And so now we can switch our gears back to the interactive notebook. But Gilligan's research basically showed that women consistently scored lower than men when they were evaluated based on Kohlberg's theory, but she did not think that that actually made them less moral. She felt like his theory was not taking into account key differences in how men and women typically evaluate moral situations. So she found that the lower scores actually resulted from the expected roles of women in society, and typically, in most societies, women are expected to care for other people and make sure that they're maintaining social happiness and valuing relationships with others. And so, for women, because they're expected to live that way, their highest level of morality tends to be based on compassion and concern for others, what she would call a tend and befriend model, which contrasts with a more male emphasis on individual rights and justice. So she's pretty famous for taking Kohlberg to court and saying, "Hey, buddy, I don't think that your theory actually encompasses how everybody makes moral decisions, and who's to say what is specifically right and wrong at that post-conventional level that he doesn't really define very well." Okay, so we're going to pause now and give you an opportunity to complete some practice in your interactive notebook. And so for each situation that you see there, you're going to decide in which stage of Kohlberg's theory the person is responding. So go ahead and write the stage and also the reasons for your response in the space provided. This is exactly the type of thing that you'll see on the exam itself. They're going to give you scenarios and ask you, at what stage is this person reasoning? Why do you think so? If it's an FRQ, you'd be asked to explain. Otherwise, you just might have a multiple choice question in that regard.